Okay, thank you very much everyone for joining, and thank you very much to Ewan Young, who's our intelligence specialist, joining us from Microsoft. Today we'll be speaking about Power BI Pro in a little bit more detail, and I'll be handing over to Ewan to step us through the product and how to identify when it's a premium opportunity versus the functionality that's available in Power BI Pro. We will be recording the session and making the recording available to all attendees, as well as anyone who has registered post the session. So please get in contact if you'd like the recording to be shared further than that particular circle. So without further ado, thank you very much. Ewan, I hand over to you.
Thanks, Vanessa. Thanks for that. I see we've got a very small audience today, so I think let's make it really interactive. I don't mind if you guys come off mute at any stage and want to pose a question. If we have more people joining a little bit later, then we can maybe just use a show of hand to ask a question. But I think just ask your question directly rather than the arm window. I'd like to keep the session interactive. So if you, maybe with a show of hands, who was in this session, the last one we had, or the first one in the series? Maybe a quick show of hands. Okay, so we only have one. Okay, so that was Vanessa, that was you, obviously. So maybe we just do a quick recap, just to kind of see where we were, what we covered in the last session. And then, yeah, and then kind of position that, because I think the series, the idea was that the series kind of leads up to where we are today. But don't worry if you didn't attend the previous session, I'll just do a quick summary. So we did have our colleague that from Microsoft that kind of covered the more around the selling of Power BI. And he kind of spoke a lot around that. I kind of covered it more from a demonstration perspective. And today I want to just take it one step further and kind of really look at how we identify opportunities to sell. If you recall, let me start sharing my screen. Okay, let me know when you can see the screen.
We can see your desktop.
Okay, cool. Just going to bring up something quickly. In fact, before I go there, I always like to start this way. So before we do a quick recap, I like to share up front kind of the stuff that I use and what I use in terms of the resourcing, stuff like that. So first and foremost, I like to present directly from public content. So I tend to use a lot of resources that anyone can access. I tend to not use X a lot. And I like to keep the session intact. So the first thing I want to share with you is just the link where you can find all the resources on Power BI. So if you look at the Power BI documentation landing page, it's fairly extensive. A lot of our product sets has got fairly good documentation. But what I particularly like around the Power BI documentation is the way that it's structured. If you look carefully, you'll see that the content is structured into key areas. For example, if you're a Power BI consumer, it will kind of tailor the content around what a consumer would be looking for from a Power BI perspective. Obviously, getting started is probably what every product has. So that's fairly common. But let's say, for example, you wanted to transform or shape data. You can kind of go directly into that area and look at the content relevant to that area. So I really like the way they structured the content for Power BI. The other resource I'm going to share, so this is great. If you're looking for something specific, please use this as your landing page, as your go-to page. I can tell you that almost 99% of the queries that I get from partners or customers around Power BI, in most cases, I find, as I mentioned, 99% of the time, I find the answers right here on this within our documentation. And in most cases, I will share the direct link to it. So I do invite you to, go and find the content. The search is also pretty good. So if you know what you're looking for, you have a query, try and do a search, or look through the content that is structured here, zooming into the relevant area. Like I said, 99% of the time you'll find the answers there. The second thing I want to point to share with you is the white papers. Now, almost all my discussions is based around this planning and enterprise deployment document. So me being a technical specialist, I specialize in solutioning and architecture. So it's less about support engineering, that I leave to my very busy colleagues that kind of really dive into how you install and, when you have challenges, how you troubleshoot. I focus more on, positioning, identifying obviously challenges within an organization, and then focusing on how do we put a solution together using the capabilities within the platform to address that particular requirement. And then obviously looking at how do you put the architecture together, how do you scale that, and how do you ensure that you're future-proofing it for the enterprise. Now, a lot of that type of thinking and the strategy and the vision and methodology around that, has been put together by a lot of clever people at Microsoft, and they kind of share this in white papers. So I use that as the basis of conversation. So today, I'm going to be covering this particular document. I talked through this. So you can always reference, going forward, you can always kind of go back. So I don't really need to share a slide deck because that's kind of everything I'll be talking about. All right. Having said that, let's jump straight into that. So this is the actual document. And I just want to recap, as I mentioned, I'm going to recap on the last session. So the last session, we covered a lot about kind of more what Power BI is, and I mentioned in that session that Power BI, obviously being a visual reporting tool, is a lot like coupling Excel and PowerPoint together. So you take the capabilities of Excel in terms of being able to manipulate data, but you take the flexibility and the ease of putting together this great visuals that you can do within, for example, PowerPoint. And you couple those together. That's effectively what Power BI does for you. And the magic all happens in Power BI Desktop. And we mentioned in that last session that Power BI Desktop is a free application. So there is no variation in terms of, hey, I need to buy Power BI Desktop and there's a price point to enter. There is also no features that you buy as part of Desktop that is licensed. So, for example, it's free software. You install it. And when I say free, you do obviously use what we call a free license, but it is a known user license. So even if it's free, you still have to register and sign in. You install the app, and I always recommend installing the store application because that way the app will stay current and you always have the latest version, because we kind of, being a cloud-based solution, we literally push out updates and new capabilities every 2 weeks, etc. Or little updates in once a month, like some major stuff. So it's always best to keep current all the time. Having said that, from Power BI Desktop, you have all the capabilities, even as a free user. And today we're going to focus on kind of where that differentiating point comes in terms of when you decide, hey, here's opportunity to upsell to Pro. But note that with the Power BI Desktop and what's represented on this graphic on the screen, it has all the... Okay, so I see somebody can't hear. I think maybe Hersha, maybe you've got some audio settings. I'm sure everyone else can hear me, right?
I can hear you fine.
Oh, we're still good. All right. Okay. Yeah, Hersha, I think just look at your audio and video settings, or audio settings, sorry, the setup. Otherwise, maybe just rejoin the session. Maybe you just got a bad connection. Right. So carrying on. If you look at how you actually get data into the system, the type of connectors that you can access, it's pretty much the same whether you're a free user or whether you are a pro licensed user, etc. We don't license the product based on the connectors. So what this means is that anybody can really get going fairly easy and simply. You don't need to get these trial licenses to be able to test out Power BI. Anybody can literally just sign up for a free license, install Power BI desktop, and away you go. So we covered this last week, and what I want to focus on, or let you kind of know that the only really big difference between what we covered last week and what we're going to cover today is the differentiation. So last week, or sorry, it wasn't last week, it was maybe 2 weeks ago, we covered how you can build out I did a demonstration, showed you some samples, I shared some content with you that you can actually go and build your own report, etc. And the only limitation with the free license is really that when you build this particular report, you store the data set, you publish it, you can even publish it, access it off the service, etc. You publish it into a My Workspace, and the limitation is that you're the only one that can access that. In other words, you cannot share it with others. So that's a limitation, right? So effectively, the limitation of free license is that it's full functionality, but it limits you to personal collaboration. Okay. So that's a very quick summary of the last session, and gives us a good kind of springboard into what we want to cover today. Any questions on that before I continue? Everybody okay with that? All clear? All good? Everyone, anyone? Yeah.
Hi, sorry, Vanessa again. Um, so I just have a question that's not necessarily pertaining to last week's stuff, but Microsoft announced that the Power BI Premium per user license is going to be available from the 1st of April.
Yes.
And I was just hoping that we could maybe just touch on that during the course of the webinar as well. If you have any information that you can share regarding the functionality available for that, or even just the relevant link in the doc site would be great.
Absolutely. I will definitely cover that. So today I will be covering premium capability, and we're talking to pro and in intro to premium. And in the intro to premium, I'll be talking about the two variants, the premium capacity node and the premium per user, which is exactly what you've just referenced now, Vanessa. I will cover that. All right. So this is what we call personal collaboration. Right. So as mentioned, the big difference then is how do you sell this to an organization? Well, last time I mentioned to you, hey, encourage everyone to start using Power BI for personal collaboration, and very quickly you realize that when they find that it's so simple, it's so easy to build these amazing reports, like I showed you in that session, they will get to a point where they want to share this with colleagues. And I did mention to you that they could share it by physically taking the file that you publish, making it available to them. But the problem is that when you want to make changes, everyone is not a single version of the truth. It means everyone's kind of working on their own little document. So ideally, what happens in a small team is one person has maybe created a great report, they want to share it with others, and they find that to do that sharing very easy and simply, they're lacking the capability to do that. And that's kind of where the pro license comes in. So pro allows you to be able to firstly author and share a license, share a report with others, and then having a pro license also allows you to consume a report that was shared by others. So that's kind of the entry point. Okay. So for example, if you are 5 users or 10 users in a little team, and you guys want to be able to share the reports that you've built and share it with each other, so that just one person updates it and you've got a single version of the truth of that report, you will need the 5 or 10 pro licenses. Okay, so each user that wants to share or consume a shared report needs a license. Okay. A free license cannot be used even to consume a report that was shared using a pro license. Is that pretty clear? You all clear on that?
Yeah.
Sounds
good.
Okay, great. So let's take this one step further. So if I jump one step further, we kind of now get to a point where we look at kind of small team collaboration. Okay. So small team collaboration is exactly that. Hey, if you look at the structure over here, it's pretty much the same. Okay, same structure as this one over here. Just worth mentioning, and I know there might be a question later because I think Vanessa kind of gave me a heads up on this. If you do a gateway as a personal user, just note, I did mention you had full capability. You could, for example, build a report in the desktop, which accesses an on-prem resource, but when you publish it into the service needs to be able to access the original data source to keep that report up to date when you set up a scheduled refresh. You do that by virtue of a gateway, and because you're operating as a single user, you set up what's called an on-premise personal data gateway. I'm just going to mention this here in the next or third webinar in this series. We're going to kind of dive more into the architecture stuff and deep dive, and then we'll kind of talk more about gateways and gateway setups and kind of, whether you go personal and standard and clustered and all that kind of stuff. But I just want to mention and position that even as a free license user, you can still install a gateway, but you're installing the gateway mainly in personal mode. So personal mode is just for Power BI purposes so that you can refresh your particular report by means of the data source. I will talk to the variations and how many refreshes you get. I'll cover that a bit later. Right, so going back to the small team collaboration. Okay, just thought it was a message there. Right, for example, if you look here, the setup is pretty much the same. So you're accessing the data source, you're still constructing using desktop, building up your report, you're still publishing it, right? The difference now is when you publish, you're now publishing it into what we call a workspace, not a My Workspace. My Workspace was only personal for you. This is now a team workspace. So this is an area where someone is kind of taking the role function of the administrator for that workspace. So they'll set up permissions, who's members, who's contributors. So members would be people that can access the workspace to consume reports that's been shared. Contributors would be individuals that can add reports, dashboards into the workspace and share it with others. So maybe in your 10-user type team, maybe there's two really kind of high, call them pro or super users of Power BI, and they were given this amazing task of building up the reports on behalf of the team. So they'll be the contributors building up these reports and sharing it with the rest of the team that will then just consume. Under the scenario, though, you will then, if it's 10 users, you will need 10 pro licenses. And same scenario happens there. You can still use the mobile apps, and when you publish it, it's available through the service. One thing to note here, that when you get into this scenario here, it's now not a personal gateway. Here we start recommending that you set up a standard mode gateway. Now, personal gateway is normally installed on your own machine. In this scenario here, we're talking about a on-premise data gateway that is installed on behalf of the organization. It will be managed by the IT organization itself. It might live in as a virtual machine in their kind of virtual infrastructure. It could be a physical machine as well. Obviously, that there's pros and cons around that, but that we'll talk about in the next session. But that standard mode gateway can then be used to basically access the data source and keep the reports up to date. So you can set up multiple connections on that gateway. These gateways can then also be set up in standard mode. You can also set them up what we call clustered or standard. Clustered would be if you wanted to have multiple redundancies, but that's normally when you start talking premium. So in this small scenario, standard would be fine, would be single one. Right. Any questions on that? Good. Okay. Right. Now, so somebody will probably raise the question and say, hey, you know what, at which point does it still make sense to continue with pro licenses? Well, if you kind of look at it, if you look at and I'm going to talk about the retail pricing. Obviously, each customer has their own well, at enterprise level, we have various discount levels. I think in your SMB, I'm not sure how your pricing model works for customers there. But I'm just going to talk about not talking about the discount levels and agreements. I'm just talking purely on a retail pricing. If you look at the retail pricing for Power BI Pro, retail pricing is about $10 per user per month for Pro. Then a premium capacity node, I'll touch on premium now, but just for now, just kind of making the mental note that a premium capacity node entry point is $5,000 $5,000 per month. Okay, that's setting up the infrastructure for a premium capacity node that is kind of dedicated to your organization. If you do the simple math and you say, hey, you know what? If I divide $10 per user per month into this 5K, you get you a figure called, well, maths will end up being 500 if you do the simple division. So what that tells you is the minute you get to 500 users of Pro, you're kind of sitting at a point where you can consider an entry capacity node. So when would you consider doing that? Well, I did say to you that every Pro license, every user will need a Pro license to either be a contributor, build a report and share it, or to consume a report that's been shared. But what if the structure of the organization is like, hey, maybe there's only 10 people in total that actually are Pro users that, sorry, let me say, I'll use a different word here. Let's call them advanced super users on Power BI. That's building the reports for the organization. The rest of the organization is really just consuming reports, okay? So you've got 10 people building reports and you've got about, I don't know, let's say 500 plus users that's mainly consuming reports. Now, under that scenario, if you were licensing on Pro, you would have to buy 510 Pro licenses, okay? So that means you're already going to be $5,500. So it would make sense in that scenario to rather buy 5 Pro licenses because they're the only ones that's contributing, creating, authoring. Then you buy a capacity node, and the capacity node allows you unlimited access to consume reports only. So in other words, those users under the capacity license entitlement can't build reports for sharing with others, but they can consume the reports. So that way it becomes much more affordable. So the tipping point is actually at the 500 user mark, because then you can license your entire organization for consumption at that point. Nessie, you have a question about your hand raised?
Yes, I do. So the question that I have is in terms of the people that are just consuming reports. Now, obviously, there's 2 levels. There's consuming of dashboards and there's consuming of reports. So I wanted to find out what the alternatives are in terms of sharing to users that do not have a Power BI license or perhaps have Power BI free only. Like, so can you potentially put it onto a website for them to consume? So what's generally the way to do that? Or do they have to go the premium route to allow users that are on an Office 365 license, for example, to consume either a report or a dashboard?
So how many users are we talking about? Just give me under your scenario.
So let's say for example, we're working with a company that is small to medium. So they're not yet 500 employees. They are sitting at, let's say, 200 employees. So they don't necessarily want to get everyone a Power BI Pro license, but they also only have a few people generating reports for the rest of the organization to have access to the particular data. So how would you go about then licensing your scenario so that the other, say, 180 people can also view either reports or dashboards?
Yeah. So within that scenario, okay, even though they don't want to buy a Pro license, okay, the most cost-effective way to license for that organization is still a Pro license for each of those users, 200. It will still come in at a lower price point. If look, there are other considerations for premium, which I will touch on later, but let's assume that the other requirements for premium is not valid in the scenario. It's just basic reports, dashboards that this particular organization wants to share. And under that scenario, a pro license, even though they're not going to be building reports to share with others, licensing them on a pro license is still going to be the most cost effective. Just the way it is. Because the only other way to be able to consume a report is through a premium capacity node or a premium per user license. And unfortunately, if you look at the cost points there, I mean, you in already for a premium capacity node, you're going to hit 5K. With 200 users, you are below that point. You're at 2K, so it's half. But even though you don't want the pro license, it's still more cost effective to do it that way. Does that make sense, Vanessa?
Yes, thank you for clarifying. I appreciate it.
Okay, good. And just note when and a lot of people refer to, hey, I only want to do it in a website. I've got a portal and I want to make a dashboard available there. Just remember that's called embedding. To be able to embed, you still need a embedding capability. You can either buy the embedding capability directly through an Azure subscription, or if you buy a premium capacity node, you have the entitlement to do Power BI embedded. Okay, so that's so either way, you are in for at least a 5K. Anyway, so that's why I'm still saying Pro is still the most cost effective if there aren't any other requirements that also needs or heads the customer in the direction of premium. Okay. All right, so that's kind of covering this small team. This kind of sits in the middle, and this is still the pro. So we're not talking premium yet, right? Because as I mentioned, up to 500, the most cost effective here is still licensing it on pro. Okay. So what are the considerations then to go from pro to premium, other than the cost? Meaning, hey, I've now hit 500 users, and now it just makes a lot more sense to go to a premium capacity node because I've only got 10 people that construct reports. Okay, so we've got that one. Jot that down. Note that to identify, to ask a customer, how many people are constructing reports versus how many consuming. See if you're getting anywhere close to that 500 mark. So that's the one decision point done. That's your decision tree, right? So the next point would be to look at some other requirements around what else can premium do for you. So I just want to switch to, oh, sorry, my bad. Now this is also a free available public resource I'm sharing, and this is the pricing guide, right, on Power BI. But what is nice about the pricing guide, it gives you the capability breakdown in terms of what is licensed per each individual type of license. Okay. Now, the area I want to focus on is this column here is Power BI Pro, and then here we start having the premium. Okay, for now, don't worry about the per user and per capacity. We'll just talk about premium as a whole for now. Okay, I just want you to get the difference between pro, the decision criteria between when do I move from pro to premium. We can then consider which one will per user be better or per capacity be better. I'll have that discussion separately. Okay. Well, now just see these as one column. So this is kind of the area I want you to focus on here. If you have under Vanessa's scenario, and I said to her that there was only a cost consideration there, but if there were any other criteria to consider, the other criteria would be something like, what if that organization has a model? So a model is when you build up the data set. So the data set is built up from obviously the data sources. So maybe it's Excel, maybe as a starting point, maybe you're pointing to SQL and some other data sources, and you transforming that data and extracting it and loading it into your data set to make it available for your report. And now that model for that data set exceeds 1 gig size limit, right? When that happens, then you don't really have a choice. The only way you can share a data set and build or build reports that have a data set larger than 1 gig is to share the report and the data set. It has to live in what we call that a premium capacity node workspace. Okay. So that's the first consideration. So you'll have to ask the customer, what do you envisage those data sets being? Okay. And they can test it. Because like I said to you, you can use the desktop and you can build up that model and see what that sizing looks like. Right? So you'll very quickly see if you're going to need a premium node there. The other consideration would be maybe they, when they build the report, and I did tell you that the data sources, which may or may not sit on-prem, it could be cloud-based, etc., they get data sources update the data set on a scheduled refresh. So you decide, when to update it. Now, with the Pro license, you can only refresh that report 8 times a day. So 8 times a day would mean if you look at an 8-hour business window, you effectively can only refresh that report once an hour. Okay, if you look at a window, 8-hour window between 9 and 5 or 8 and 4, etc. And maybe that is good enough. So under the scenario, for example, hey, you know what, the model size is less than a gig, but hey, I want to refresh this report. I need to refresh it at least every 20 minutes or 30 minutes during the day at any time, because these dashboards are quite critical, the metrics, for us to make decisions throughout the day. So for that reason, you may need to switch, regardless of the cost, to a premium capacity node, because that will allow you to refresh those reports up to 48 times a day. Okay. So if you're looking at an 8 business hour window, somebody do maths there quickly. What are we talking about? Maybe 20 minutes or so, I think 15 minutes. Anyway, so that would be the refresh at 48 times a day. Okay. If it's business hours, 8-hour business day, and you do the math on that, I mean, it's really quick, right? That would be, what's that, 6 into an hour, quickly, it's every 10 minutes. Yeah. So every 10 minutes, you'd be able to refresh that report. Vanessa, question?
Yes, sorry. So my question relates to the model size limit. Where would I be able to have a look to say, okay, my model is currently this size? And what would happen when I get close to the limit?
Yeah, so that was, so when you're building up that report and you're constructing it in your Power BI desktop, that's where you're actually building the report and you have the model. The model would be your PBIX file, okay? Then you're publishing it into the service. Now, there is a bit of compression that does happen there. So at the point when you publish it, you'll then be able to see, when you publish it, what the size of that model is, all right? And then as you refresh that data set and the data set grows as well, you'll be able to monitor it on the Power BI service to be able to see what the size of that data set is. And obviously, if already straight off the bat, when you want to publish something that's too big, then already it will tell you you cannot, because it's exceeding the limit of the workspace. Then you'll immediately know, oh, okay, you probably need to get a premium capacity node. Alternatively, if you publish it but that's growing over time, you can track it within the service and you can see, oh, at some point in time, we're going to have to convert this workspace to a premium capacity workspace because this data set is growing and it's going to start exceeding the limits. Make sense?
Yes.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, okay. Sorry, I was on mute.
Okay, that's fine. Do you physically want to see where that is, or is that good enough for now?
No, I think that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Right. Then there is one other consideration as well. Okay. I'm going to merge them slightly in the sense that, I call these advanced capabilities. So I call, whether it's AI stuff or analyze data in Azure, these are all advanced data integrations. If you want to do any of the advanced stuff, like, for example, build machine learning models and leverage that for advanced AI to do analytics on the data and make that analytics available for reporting. That's only available in premium capacity. Okay. obviously because it's happening at a service level. This endpoint is the capability to allow the data set that you build to kind of look almost like a semantic database that you can query using other tool sets. You can literally look at it as a database. So it presents itself as an XML endpoint. It allows you to easily be able to kind of administer and manage that data set using third-party tools, etc. Common tools that kind of data engineers use when they're working with databases, right? Data flows, we'll chat about that a little bit later, but that's also just note it's only available in the enterprise premium capacity node as well. Okay, so that's the advanced analytics and advanced data insight stuff. Okay. And then the last one is this application lifecycle management over here as well. Okay, so just a note of that. Other than that, oh, one more. I did two. So that was the advanced, and the other one is the storage. So you'll note that with a pro license, you get 10 gigs storage per user. So that storage, if you do the math quickly, you'll notice that your model size is limited to a gig, right? So if you do, let's say all your models is just about a gig or almost a gig, okay? That user, a user that will be limited to about 10 reports of almost a gig in size because the user limit is limited to 10 gig space, okay? That's obviously accumulated per user. And I think the limitation in total within a shared space is about 100 gig. The minute you exceed that total limit, we'll get closer, you want to build reports that are bigger or use more storage, you're going to have to use a premium capacity node, and the limitations there are 100 terabyte storage as a whole. That's not, it's not accumulated per user. Obviously, this is per user because every user has a license, obviously gets a contributed storage. Here you're buying unlimited users and just buying storage, the whole workspace. That's a capacity node workspace. Any questions on that?
All good from my side. Anyone in attendance would like to ask a question?
And also just think about the thinking of the sales cycle as well, in terms of, you know, I go and I spend some time with the customer, introduce them to Power BI, they start using the free, and once they do these amazing reports and they're so super excited to share it with the team or the organization, that is where you start monetizing. Okay, so you're planting the seed, you laying it down the foundation, they start consuming. So that's why consumption is important. Even if it's free, once they got Office 365, they're entitled, get them to use Power BI. And then the next thing would be, as you visit that customer and say, hey, you know what reports have you guys built? You know, encourage them to start building, get them to start doing, maybe help them with dashboarding in the day type sessions, where you help them to build reports. Because the minute they start building stuff, they're going to want to share those reports with others. And that is where you start monetizing. Then you start asking the questions that I've laid down for you around how many people are you sharing it with. You know, that will tell you the pro capacity node, what's the size of the data set and kind of stuff. So I just want you to think around those pointers because that's quite key. Any questions on that? The thinking. Is the thinking quite clear? Anybody who sold the on the call? Show of hand. Who has sold the premium capacity node thus far? So on the call, do any of you believe you know the criteria to go and sell a premium capacity node right now? Or is it still unclear? Show of hands. Who's able to sell a premium capacity node right now to a customer? Still no. Okay, so that tells me that maybe we need more clarity. Vanessa, let me ask you the question. Are you given what we just covered now, are you pretty clear in being able to position and selling a premium capacity node to a customer? When is the right time to do that? Sorry to pick on you.
Sorry, and Vanessa just had to take a quick call, but she will be back with us in 2 seconds. So sorry about that.
Maybe Roxanne, I can ask you the question. Not clear.
No. I mean, I'm listening and it's definitely helping my understanding. Definitely. I think it's definitely getting clearer. I think if you can maybe just go into a little bit more detail, but it's definitely getting clearer on my side.
Okay. All right, so let's look at, I want to make sure that this lands, because I think to move to the next step, it's kind of important that this lands. Is there anybody still got a gap, or anybody want me to cover this slightly differently, or still have a question around this? I think it's important to kind of just get that. No one. Okay, cool. All right, we'll move on. So there was a question asked earlier on about this premium per user and premium capacity. So I'm going to cover that now, right? So we now clearly know when to position Pro and when to position a premium capacity, okay? We've covered it. It's either model size, it's refresh rate, or it's advanced AI or data analytics, or it is total capacity. That could be the consideration, or it could be a case that, hey, the customer, well, that's kind of a consideration to move from a Pro to premium. We're pretty clear on that. We do know how to get from free to Pro. That's when you want to share. So we got that. So now the options around premium, when would you consider per user and when would you consider per capacity? So let's say, for example, you've got less than 500. That gets scenario again of Vanessa, 200 users. Okay. Now I'm not sure on the pricing. I think the pricing is up here. There it is. $85. Okay, that's auto scale. And I think the price is up top here. There it is. Per user is $20. Okay, so it's double. Okay. Oh, by the way, see the pricing I was telling you about, $10 per user and $5 per capacity node. That's kind of how I got to that figure. I just rounded and said 10 and 500, so the math worked out easier. That's kind of what tells you, if you take $10 into that, you know that at 500 users, it makes sense to go per capacity. Now let's follow that same scenario. Now you'll see that at 250 users, okay, you'll be at a per capacity. So same kind of thinking here is if you are under 250 users or 250 and under, at 250 you can obviously still consider both, but the minute you are under that 200 users, Vanessa's example, it may make sense to use a per user license instead, because that will be more cost effective than going on a per capacity node, because this is the committed 5K per month. This one at 200 users will bring you at 4K, so you're saving $1,000, 1K per month. And the only difference you're going to see is around, if, for example, you don't require an on-prem per capacity license, entitles you to install report server on-prem. So report server, Power BI report server is also what you used to get with if you had a SQL enterprise agreement, you were entitled to report server, but you can also get it by virtue of buying a capacity node. So report server will allow you to install an on-premise variant of Power BI. It has certain limitations in the sense that it doesn't have all the latest capabilities that we can only offer and make available in the cloud. So obviously you are installing and running the infrastructure on-prem. You have to manage it, install it, etc. But you can start serving and publishing reports closer to where the users are, assuming your users are working on-premise. So it could be two considerations. One, you had some kind of contract with an organization where the data that you're using for reporting could not be shared in a cloud-based service, and it had to remain within a local kind of data center to the organization, maybe you want to consider report server. Or if you were an organization and you were worried about connectivity, maybe you wanted to do kind of direct reporting at scale, and you wanted to stay close to the data source because you were updating it all the time, there you probably would also consider report server on-prem. In that scenario, per capacity. If that wasn't a consideration, you could go with the per user license under that scenario, Vanessa. Okay. And you'll see there's only other difference here would be multi-geo. I haven't really seen any multi-geo use in this country. And then this is a new capability that was just kind of launched now, which is the auto scale. So auto scale is only available as a per capacity and not per user. So I think you could safely assume that with Vanessa's scenario for that customer, 200 users, this would be more cost effective. It's still premium, another way to license this, but you could consider the per user license model. Any questions on the per user? I'm going to dive a little further into the capabilities of per user and when you want to consider some other consideration. But can you see the distinction between the two? Any questions on that?
Yes, so I can see the distinction, and it definitely does make a lot more sense. I had a question around the on-premise reporting and sort of what the difference is, but now I realize that was kind of obvious all the time, where the on-premises reporting is where you actually store your Power BI reporting on an on-premise server. The data isn't necessarily coming from on-premise. Is that correct?
No, the data actually is. So your public, well, remember, just think about it as when you're creating a report, you're building up that PBIX file, which is the model for the data, or the data set itself lives in that PBIX file, which you then publish, right? So if you've refreshed, if the data set will obviously contain the latest data at that point in time, right? Now you're publishing it. You publish it either into a service, which is the Power BI service, Microsoft Power BI shared service, or a capacity, premium capacity workspace service, or you can publish it to an on-premise reporting server. Okay, so that's the choice you have. When you publish that report, to keep the data up to date, you obviously need to refresh it. The advantage is that if you published it on an on-premise server and all the data sources that data set is linked to happens to be on-premise as well, then you've got no real latency, have you? Because you're on the same network.
Oh, okay. All right. I understand. I can see where the benefit of that could be. If all your data sources are sitting on-prem, then you don't need to worry about, moving the delay between the on-premise data and the cloud report. Is that correct?
Yeah. But, if you think, and that may still be relevant for small organizations, and in the scenario, I don't deal much with these scenarios because I deal with many enterprise customers, but I think in your space, SMB space, you may find this more. Maybe in new startup organizations in your space, maybe you won't find it, in the sense that if they start up and they don't build their own data sources on-prem, they actually start up as organization, start leveraging a lot of infrastructure in the cloud, may not be relevant for them. So it's difficult really to say. But on the whole, I find that enterprise organizations, there is a big move to move a lot of the data into cloud-based infrastructure, so Azure services, AWS, etc. And I mean, if you're moving your infrastructure into AWS, that gateway and the way it talks into the service, it talks on the Azure service bus. So if you had Azure infrastructure and you maybe had your Oracle, your SAP system sitting in Azure, for example, and you wanted to refresh a data set that's connected to those data sources, it would literally happen across the Azure service bus. So there would be no latency there. So that would be a good consideration to say, hey, you know what, it's not doing on-prem. So I think going forward, the major consideration around on-prem might be about data sovereignty under certain contractual arrangements where a customer had a contract with a vendor or some other customer, where your customer had a contract with one of their customers that the data had to live on their site. That could probably be the only criteria going forward. As more and more companies start moving their data sources to the cloud. Does it make sense, Vanessa?
Absolutely. Thank you, Ewan.
Okay. Right, so let's dive into this per user and per capacity. There's a couple of other considerations here as well. I want to start talking about a scenario where maybe you're just looking at 10 users, not the 200 that Vanessa mentioned. So I want some other thinking around that. Where did I put it? Here we go. This one. Okay. I'm going to share this. I like sharing everything that I show you, so you've got immediate access to it. Okay. So this is a consideration. When would you consider a per user, premium per user? And the other thing is, what does it allow you to do? For example, you know that if you've got a pro license, you can, the scenario with the 10 users, with the 200 users licensed with pro, each and every one of them can build a report and share it with others, and they can consume a report that's been shared by others as well. Premium capacity node, it was pretty obvious there as well. You had 10 pro users, maybe they constructed, built and shared reports, and the rest of the organization, unlimited users could consume, but they could only consume the can't build reports. Now, per user is slightly different. Kind of leans towards premium per capacity, but it does have some of the capability of pro as well. It's kind of that little middle child that leans in both directions. Okay. So the best way to explain it is with this little table. Now, the way to read this table, and it's not confusing, is read the description on the far left. It says, if you create or share Power BI content, okay, in the service, okay, in this type of workspace or app, okay. So the workspaces are a pro workspace, okay. That would be a workspace, a standard workspace that you construct for sharing. That would be a pro workspace. If you build a workspace and you say, I want to use dedicated capacity, you're assigning a premium capacity resources to that workspace. So that would be a premium per capacity. The premium per user is a workspace that you create and you say, hey, you know what? I'm assigning users that are going to share and use this workspace and I've been allocated a premium per user license. Then that would be that workspace over there. So there are 3 different types of workspaces that you can create within Power BI service. Is that clear? I'll show you what that looks like. This is the workspaces over here. My workspace is your own workspace. This was your free license. And then workspaces are, like let's say sales and marketing. This was a workspace that was created. And this is where they're sharing their reports and dashboards in this particular workspace. This would be a pro workspace. Okay. If I had capacity, I could take this particular workspace and I could assign dedicated capacity, then it becomes a premium capacity workspace. Okay. All right. There was I. Back here. Okay. Right. So now that we know the 3 different types of workspaces, let's look through the grid. I have a pro workspace, so 10 users, pro licenses, create a workspace, sharing stuff. Okay, what can you do? If I'm a pro user, so this is the license assigned to the user. So this looks at the workspace and the content, and across here looking down is the license the user has. So a user with a pro license, yes, you can view and access the content in a pro workspace. Okay. The pro license, can you look at and view content that's in a premium per user workspace? No. Can this user look or consume content in a premium per capacity workspace? Answer is yes. So that's interesting. Why this is interesting is because a premium per capacity is unlimited. Remember, even a user with a free license can access view only. In other words, they can consume a report in that per capacity. So it would obviously make sense that a pro user can also get access to that report and content. The differentiation, distinguishing difference here is that a premium per capacity, premium per user workspace is basically only a dedicated capacity for users that have a premium per user license. So therefore, a pro user won't have access to it. Okay. Now we look at the premium per user license. So this is users that have this license allocated. Now, what is interesting is that if you buy a premium per user license and you saw the costing was $20, just note that you don't need a pro license for a premium per user license. The reason for that is pro license capability is included with premium per user. So in other words, where you need a pro license always to be able to share content, i.e. I'm building a report and I want to publish and share it. You need a pro license. Maybe you needed that even with a premium per capacity node. The same is valid with a premium per user license, but in this scenario, you don't have to buy an initial pro license and allocate it to that user. It is included in the premium per user license. So if you look at that $20 price point, basically it's $10 for the pro license, if you want to look at it that way, and to get the premium capacity capability, you're paying an extra $10 per user. Okay, so that's kind of the way you can justify that cost point. So therefore, because you have pro capabilities as part of this license, yes, you can view any report, consume any report that has been shared in a pro workspace by a pro user. Okay, so that's great. As a premium per user, yes, you can access content that's shared in a premium per user workspace, obviously, because you have a premium per user license. And as always, the bottom one, anything in a premium per capacity workspace that's been shared there, anyone can access it. Why? Because even a free user can access it, right? So you won't discriminate against an advanced or user that's been buying or paid for something that a free user can access. So you'll always have BS at the bottom. So effectively, a premium per user license can consume any report or any data set that's been shared, regardless of which workspace it's been shared. Yes, Vanessa.
Sorry, Ewan, I just want to clarify my understanding on something. So with the premium per capacity, you'll purchase the, let's say, Power BI Premium P1, but you'll still need a at least one Power BI Pro license for the setup and creation and distribution. Is that correct, or has that changed?
No, you are correct, but it's actually one or more. Depends on how many people in the organization are going to be building reports and sharing those reports in that premium per capacity workspace. If 10 people in the organization are building and sharing reports, you're going to need 10 pro licenses.
On top of the P1 license.
Correct.
As an example. Okay, cool. Thank you.
That per capacity workspace is only for sharing and consuming. Unlimited users can consume. That's all it is. To actually publish it into it, you still need a pro license. Okay. Right, so that brings us to the last category, a premium per capacity user. Can they access a pro workspace or report that's been shared there? Answer is no. Why? Because effectively, the user that is under this, that's covered under premium per capacity kind of P1 SKU that you bought, is effectively a free user. You're not actually buying a user license here. So this is still classified as a free user. There is no such a thing in my book as a premium per capacity user. I think this is just for explanation's sake to make it easy. These are actually free users. So a free user obviously cannot share something that's in a pro workspace, right? They cannot share or access or consume anything that is in a premium per user because they are a free user. So the only content that they can consume is content shared in a premium per capacity because that is shared with free users. Okay. Does it make sense now? That's the grid. That's effectively the criteria. Any questions before I go a little bit further into the premium per user license? All good. Okay. So besides the obvious, which is the tipping point of 250 users, which is the tipping point between a premium per user and a premium per capacity. Okay. Something else to maybe consider when you'd need a premium per user. You know, other than maybe I think I shared it here. Yeah. Other than the capacity, the refresh cycles. Remember, what's valid for a per user is also valid for a premium capacity node. And the other thing to consider is if you want to do, and I'm not sure if it's actually talk about it here. It's not actually shown here, which is quite interesting. Yeah, here it is. Paginated report. Anyone on the call know what a paginated report is? Anybody want to wager a guess? Nessa?
No, but I'd love to know because I've been receiving questions about it, and then I send reports and links and hope they don't ask me for any more information. So
Okay.
yes, that's something that I'd love to know more about.
Okay, so if you look at our standard reporting, standard Power BI reporting is generally like, you know, you building up a dashboard and you're doing great visuals on aggregated data, and you're kind of showing total sales versus product, and you know, you're all familiar with the standard reporting. But now there's another type of reporting that organizations like to do. For example, if you had a tabular kind of structure, just think of it as an Excel spreadsheet where you have the spreadsheet is got all the details for invoices. Okay, so each row within the spreadsheet is an invoice, and then obviously the columns will depict who the customer is, the customer number, will have invoice number, will have amounts, will have products, etc., etc., etc. Okay, and effectively each row is then an invoice. Now, what a paginated report can do for you, it can go, you can construct a report that effectively looks like an invoice. Okay, well, effectively kind of is an invoice. So visually on a page, it's a single page report that's got all the detail for a single invoice. So in other words, you can structure it nicely, so company information, company logo, blah, 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 address details and all that kind of stuff. But what builds up that page is a record, a one row record out of that spreadsheet. So depending on who you are, maybe if you're a specific user and you're using row level security, members per row, and you signing in as a customer, or you're signing in as internal salesperson for a specific account, you'll only be able to see the invoices for certain accounts. For example, if you're an end customer and you're signing in, you can only see invoices for your customer account, and then you can see them per page. So effectively, a paginated report is exactly that. It's a page. It's a paged report, or a page report representing a row of data. That could be an invoice, it could be a statement, it could be a product, anything where you kind of want to have a one-page view of the row. Does it make sense? Okay. Now, if you got that scenario where a customer is saying, hey, I need paginated reporting capability, previously you could only get paginated reporting on a premium per capacity. This is new capability. We always had this in the SQL on-prem report server. It was introduced last year into our cloud-based service, only available on a premium per capacity. But we found that, you know, organizations didn't really want to go this route. For example, let's say you had, I don't know, 30 users or 50 users in the organization that was using Power BI reporting anyway, 50 Pro licenses. Now you had a requirement for 2 users out of that 50 that needed to do paginated reports. Maybe it was in the invoicing department. Okay, and there's only 2 users in the invoicing department that needed to do paginated reporting or have the capability. It meant you had to go and buy a premium per capacity node at 5K just to be able to satisfy the requirement for the 2 users. That's quite a big price tag. So, and this is why there's this huge interest around the premium per user license model, because now you can have 40, out of the same scenario of 50 users, you can have 48 pro licenses to cover the 48 users, and the other 2 users you buy a premium per user license, because the premium per user license covers you for pro, so they're covered for the pro capability, but now they have the additional capability to be able to do paginated reporting. So for a $40 $40 for the month, you can now do paginated reporting in that organization for those 2 versus 5K per month. Make sense? Nessa, how does that land with you in terms of the queries and questions you had?
That definitely does land a lot better and makes it a lot more clear for me. Now when I go read the doc site, it might actually make more sense. So, and I understand where the hype for the premium per user comes from as well. So thank you.
Absolutely. The other thing would be as well, remember the other criteria I was telling you, hey, here's a good upsell opportunity around the model size or the refresh rate. But you find that, once again, especially in organizations that you guys deal with, which is the smaller organizations, you're going to find that you typically have 50 to 150, 200 users, etc. What if you only had 1 report that exceeded that model size limit? Okay. Before it was crazy, man. Just because of 1 report out of the 200 reports that the organization uses, that 1 report exceeds that model size limit. Now you were forced to go and buy a 5K premium capacity node. What you could do under that scenario is, hey, that particular, and you could ring fence that 1 report. You know that only 5 users were using that 1 report. You could say, in that 50 user organization, buy 45 pro licenses, buy 5 per user licenses, that 5 users, they have the dedicated workspace in the per user capacity node. And in that dedicated workspace, you go and publish that report, which is the large model size report, because now you've got the 100 gig limit. So they satisfy their requirement around that report, but they can also still access all the other reports in the pro space, because as you know, a per user license got pro access. So once again, that's another scenario. Okay, it's a large model size requirement. Same scenario before, refresh rate. If there were 10 users in the finance department, for example, right, 50 user organization, you buy 40 pro licenses and then you buy 10 per user licenses, because in the finance department, it was critical that they had a specific report that was refreshed every 10 minutes because they needed the latest financial data to make a key critical decision. Every day they needed updated info and they needed to refresh that particular report, at least 48 times a day, or every 10 minutes in an 8-hour day cycle. So that scenario also apply. Much cheaper than going 5K hit as well. That's it. I'm going to pause here for any other questions.
No questions. I think if you won't mind quickly touching on the advanced AI test analytics and so on, which is the last one on the page that I can see there. And then we can maybe take some final questions before our next webinar, which will be happening later in the month. So if we can maybe just quickly wrap up those last few items.
Okay. Yeah, so I think I did touch on that, except I want to just talk to data flow. So I told you advanced AI would be things like where you want to do machine learning capability on top of your data and make that available for your reporting, etc. XML endpoint, I think I covered that. That was the reporting tool where you want to be able to interact with your data set and be able to visualize that data set structure using standard reporting tools that your normal database analysts would work with. So the data set will behave as an XML endpoint. In that scenario as well, you also need these kind of licenses. For me, that's not kind of a decision criteria for per user quite, because I think when you want AI capability, it's normally more suited for the whole organization rather than a specific targeted audience. The only one for me that may talk to per user would be data flow. So what a data flow really is when you set up your report and you set up your data source, and you set up, obviously, that your data source updates your data set. You're building the data set structure, and you've got one or two data sources talking into that data set. You obviously set up the rules. So it could be a case that, hey, the data coming in is fairly raw, and you maybe needed to manipulate that data. So, manipulating would be combining columns, splitting, joining, aggregating, doing some calculations on the fly. Could be quite a bit of work involved in standardizing the data. Now, let's say, for example, that data being standardized is coming out of your raw systems, out of the transactional system, etc., or some other line of business system. It's frequently done functions that's always done to get that data into a reporting state, okay? That means that every time you build a report using that data, you have to build that rules. It's crazy, right? Because it means every single report you build, you're building a model that you have to replicate that all the time. So if you're building 200 reports, you have to do it 200 times. So under that scenario, the best thing would be to build what we call data flow. So data flow is where you're abstracting the extraction and transform capability when you build the reports. Remember I told you that ETL process, you point to data source, you bring it into a data set. You do the ETL process and most of the heavy lifting stuff. You do it in what's called the data flow. The result of that data flow is kind of formatted data that's closer or virtually represents the data that you're going to use within the report. And you then make those data flows available as the data source. So in other words, somebody now building a report doesn't have to go into the setting up the data source to the 4 or 5 data sources that's going to make up his data set. All he does is he uses the data flow as the data source. And that data is now pre-formatted, structured correctly for him. He doesn't have to worry about the heavy lifting. You get your data scientist guys to do all of that. Your kind of guy, the data modeling people do all of that stuff for you. And then you just need a reporting skill, also a skill to now take that data set and now build a report on top of that. That capability is only available in Premium. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for going through that again for me. I really appreciate it. So do we have any further questions on the floor? I know that we're in the last few minutes of today's session, and I know that we've covered a lot. So thank you very much for that, Ewan, and thank you for the content that you've shared. We will make these links available by email along with the recording of the session. But before we close off, I just want to give the attendees a chance to perhaps unmute and ask a question if you guys have any particular question.
They've been fairly quiet. I wonder if they're all there.
I'm not sure. We seem to have had a few connectivity issues, but I think we're okay now.
The assumption I'm going to make is that I'm extremely clear. Mm-hmm.
Hi, Dan.
We are on. You listening?
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Then I'm going to take the credit, Vanessa, for being very, very good at explaining it that there was no questions.
You absolutely are. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining. It has been a very informative session. I appreciate every single one of you attending. And if you have any questions at a later stage, I'm very happy if you want to also send through your questions and your emails. My details are on screen at the moment. So thank you very much again to Ewan. And we will share the recording with you as well as the links post the session. Thank you very much, everyone, for your time.
Thank you.
Vanessa?